So, nuclear power, why, when, and how? Saskatchewan and Sask Power are in the midst of an energy transition. And we're facing the same challenge that many jurisdictions are around the world. And that's a need to manage our emissions profile, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We're a jurisdiction that is heavily reliant on fossil fuels, conventional fossil fuels, and for the most part, for a lot of our energy needs, and electricity is especially so. So you can see here, this is our current generation distribution from different sources in Saskatchewan, electricity only. And so we get about 2/3 of our power, our electricity, comes from conventional coal or natural gas. 25% conventional coal and just over 40% is natural gas. We do have a renewable profile in the province, and this is an area that's growing substantially. Hydro is sitting around 20%. We don't have much option to expand that too much in the province with the resources we have. But wind and solar will be expanding quite aggressively. We're sitting at about 12% wind, and our first solar project hit the grid recently, and that's a growing area that right now sits in the other. But it's a challenge. So when you think about replacing 2/3 of our generation fleet with lower emitting options, on top of the fact that we have to look at an increasing demand on power. So with electrification, other industries are going to look to electrification to help them decarbonize, and we have to be prepared for that. So not only do we have to replace this generation, we have to plan for a substantial amount of growth on the electricity sector for decarbonization of our province as a whole. And that represents a big challenge. So when you think about low or zero emitting options, the list starts to get a little bit thinner. And that's where we see the need for nuclear. We've been evaluating nuclear power for decades at Sask Power, giving our uranium resources in the province. But conventional nuclear has always been too difficult to incorporate. Conventional nuclear reactors are very large. They're in the 800 to 1,000 megawatts for every single reactor unit. And tying a single unit that big into our grid is a challenge. It's a lot of eggs in one basket. And if that unit comes offline, if it trips, it needs to be refueled, or for maintenance or some operational issues, that has to be replaced almost immediately. And grid stability comes into play there. So it makes it too difficult for a market and grid our size. It's too difficult to incorporate it. But SMRs are changing that. And so they represent an evolution of the industry in a time when we could really use the energy. So small modular reactors, the small speaks to the electrical output. And the industry categorizes that as 50 to 300 megawatts. And we're targeting projects that are right on the upper end of that, right around the 300 megawatt mark. And that makes sense. Our coal-fired boilers are 300 megawatts, our larger ones. Our new natural gas facilities are about 350 megawatts. So managing single unit generation facilities of that size is right where we want to be as for our market and our grid. Modular is just saying that the design of these reactors are such that a lot of the bigger components can be fabricated off-site in a shop environment and then shipped to site and assembled there. And that helps with manage some of the construction risk. Construction, these are capital intense projects. Even though they're small modular reactors, they're still mega construction projects. And it takes substantial amount of planning and effort to be successful with the construction. And so the modular aspect is hoped to help improve that risk profile. And then reactor, this is just the same as conventional nuclear. We get our thermal energy, our heat comes from splitting atoms, from a nuclear fission process. And so in that sense, it's the same as conventional reactors. They're small reactors, but they're still Class 1A nuclear facilities when you think about how they're regulated in Canada. So SMRs in Saskatchewan, why might they be a good match? You look right in the middle there. It's the right size for a grid. I think I talked about that. 300 megawatts, we can incorporate them into the grid effectively and economically. And they're emissions free. So there are no greenhouse gas emissions associated with the operation of this technology. When you think about carbon footprint, you can think about the construction phase, and there are carbon emissions associated with the concrete and steel and the construction activity, even through some of that through operation and maintenance. But in terms of a life cycle carbon footprint outside of kind of the emissions-free operation, nuclear power is the lowest. It is lower than even wind or solar. And that's from international bodies that don't represent the nuclear industry. These are United Nations reports that are showing those numbers. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it doesn't get better than nuclear power. And it's very reliable. So it's available 24/7, these facilities. They have a 90 to 95% availability factor, which is important for us. We have a high base load or a high amount of high industry base in Saskatchewan, and that requires power all the time, day and night, summer, winter, fall, spring, and we need to make sure our grid is reliable and we've got that demand, or we got the supply to meet the demand whenever it's there. And nuclear power represents that. So it's base load generation for Saskatchewan is how we categorize it. On the right, you can see, so we're building off of our uranium industry. We're very good at, we have rich uranium exports in the province, and we send that uranium around the world for power generation. And so it's building a little bit more out of that resource and getting a little bit more value out of that resource and building on the foundation that we have in terms of innovation and competency in the uranium space. There's also socioeconomic benefits. So I mentioned they're large construction projects, and that comes with jobs and tax revenue. It takes significant investment into educational programs, investment in the workforce, R&D, awareness, training. Those are investments that are required to safely and securely operate nuclear reactors, and that comes with as a benefit to our economy here. So there's benefits. There's also challenges. And so this slide represents our timeline, and you can see it's a long one. It takes a significant amount of early investment and a lot of planning to properly and safely and securely build and operate this type of technology. We have a very significant regulatory process. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, who is here with us tonight, is the main federal regulator for all nuclear activity in Canada. And that's to our benefit in Saskatchewan. We're a greenfield jurisdiction, but Canada isn't. Canada has an extensive nuclear industry, and we have a very mature, globally respected regulator. And so that ensures safe and secure operations, and we can leverage that to do things right in Saskatchewan. But it does require early investment. So you can see our planning phase, it's going to last until about 2029 before we're ready to make a decision to construct. And if we make the decision to construct at that time, it'll take about 4 or 5 years to build out the facility, and we could have the first reactor in operation by about the mid-2030s. So we have a lot of work to do to prepare and make sure that we're making a well-informed and a good decision come that 2029 timeframe. But you can see most of what's driving that are regulatory reviews and processes that ensure the project was developed properly. And so the first two things we need are we have to zone in on a technology, and we have a preferred technology. Gia Tachi is here with us tonight as well, and I got a little bit of information on that. And we're focused right now on site selection. So you need to find the technology, we need to have a site, and then we can go through the impact assessment process. And we'll have to go through a full federal and provincial impact assessment. And then outside of that, there are 3 licenses that we need from the CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We need a license to prepare the site, a license to construct, and a license to operate. And so those are intense, and they require significant planning and significant effort to prove that we are qualified and we can safely and securely operate this type of technology. On the bottom, you see engagement, and you can't stress how important it is for any big energy project, but especially so for a nuclear, I'd say, is that engagement. So understanding Indigenous communities, how they view the challenges and opportunities, incorporating Indigenous knowledge through the planning process and into the facility, our public engagement, customers, and all stakeholders in Saskatchewan. We put a lot of effort, and we really appreciate the time that everyone has to come out tonight and even provide some feedback and comments and questions that we'll take back and we'll use to build more materials, to share information, and go along this journey together. The engagement is very important to us. So the timeline with that safe and secure operation, there is a price tag to that, and that is part of the challenge. Is the cost. It's built into the cost of nuclear are long-term management plans that ensure safe and secure operation of the facility and of the waste streams that we have to manage. So there is some uranium is a very dense energy source. So you get a lot of energy out of a small amount of fuel. You can see one uranium pellet here, about the size of a gummy bear. 10 of those power a household for an entire year. And so the waste streams, when you think of used nuclear fuel, it takes a lot of management systems and a lot of care and attention to safe and secure operation, but the volumes are quite manageable. And so that's another aspect. There's challenges there, and there's opportunities. So I mentioned a technology selection and a preferred technology, and this is the concept sketch here. If you guys caught the GE Hitachi is here with us today, and they've gave an overview of the BWRX 300 reactor, which is the SMR we've selected as preferred for the first project in Saskatchewan. So the concept sketch is shown here. You can see a nice little Canada Post truck in the middle of the building there. And this is the project, a concept for how it will be deployed in Ontario first. So Ontario Power Generation, who is an experienced nuclear operator, is looking to deploy BWRX 300 in Ontario this decade. They've actually just broke ground on that project last week, and last month just submitted their construction license application to the CNSC, which are very major milestones for a demonstration of the technology to the Canadian regulatory system, which is very important to us in Saskatchewan. This is a little bit under the hood of what the technology looks like. You can see the reactor itself sits mostly underground, and the containment and all of the safety systems are housed within this area here. And that's where you're managing that radioactive fission, and you're producing a lot of the energy, and that energy is taken out in a closed steam loop to run a steam turbine. And that steam cycle with that steam turbine is almost identical to the steam cycle we operate with our coal-fired boilers. It's just where you get the thermal energy that's different with an SMR. And so we're very familiar with a lot of the aspects of how that steam cycle works, how the steam turbine operates, and obviously we're less familiar with the nuclear reaction part of the operation. So technology out, we're now focused a lot on site selection. And so we've done a lot of work over the first year and a half to understand technical requirements. And so those are our requirements of the technology, the machine itself, requirements of the regulatory process when you're looking to site a project like this, and requirements of our business. Where do we have a large demand for power, or where do we have infrastructure that can move that power around the province effectively? And so that's really resulted in a lot of technical criteria and technical requirements that we look for in a region that could potentially host the facility. And that's resulted in our selection of two regions in Saskatchewan, what we call the Elbow region on kind of the north and east part of Lake Diefenbaker, and the Estevan region with Boundary, Rafferty, and Alameda dams. And so our focus now is going to be to take that technical criteria and start maturing it, understanding and characterizing these regions a lot more, and then also building in social criteria, environmental criteria. So our engagement now is going to be a huge part of our site selection process. We've triggered consultations on this early siting decision with Indigenous communities in these areas to understand how rights are exercised, and use that information to avoid or mitigate any potential adverse impacts of the site selection process. And all of those streams are going to result in feedback, and we'll use that feedback to help inform our decisions as we look for that willing host and the highest opportunity site for this type of facility. So just on that, we're in 2023, we're looking to, by the end of 2023, we want to have identified the 2 highest potential sites within these regions. Now, that could be one from each, it could be both from one, but we want to narrow it down to 2 actual land parcels by the end of 2023, and then looking to make the final selection by the end of 2024. And the engagement I mentioned is a huge part of the project and a part of these decisions. So we've got an online forum where you can learn about the project, saskpower.com/engage. And you can do that at your own pace, at your own leisure. And you can also provide comments. You can ask questions, provide comments, provide feedback and input on how we're shaping and how we're looking for a site within these regions. So really encouraging everyone to go check this site out and put your feedback in and voice your questions, your thoughts, your concerns about challenges, or your aspirations about the opportunities. We really are interested in collecting all of that and making decisions that are well informed and in the best interest of Saskatchewan as a whole.